Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Julia and I discuss why some colleges do not use teacher recommendations when evaluating students in the admission process. Our roundtable is back. We take a question from a listener, from Kathy from Philadelphia, and she's a little freaked out because of the University of the Arts closing, and she wants to know, how can I know if a school is financially stable that my student is looking at? And then our college spotlight is also our interview. It's David Graves. It's my deep dive on the University of Georgia, part 4 of 5. Friends, I got in at 3 a.m. and home sweet home. That trip was A++++, but home is still home. I'm back in my studio. Hope my sound quality is a little better than hotel sound quality. And it's been a while since we've given you a tip in admissions vernacular and a big number. And celebrating coming back home, I wanted to do that for you. So, and I'll be drawing off of my trip. So for the tip, it's the SRAR. Now, Julie and I talked about the SRAR quite a bit recently, self-reported academic record. But here's my tip. Just go directly to any college that's asking you questions about the SRAR with any specific questions that you have. What I find is they are so bombarded with questions. Most of them have a pretty good response time. And I find they're able to give you a better answer than probably any counselor, whether that's school-based, independent, CBO counselor can give you. So just go directly to the school that's requiring the SRAR with your questions about the SRAR. That's what I'm doing now for all of my students. If they have an SRAR question, I'm saying go directly to that school. All right. For our admissions vernacular. So I met with 3 admission officers at UCSD, University of California, San Diego. And we were talking a lot about seasonal readers, and I was curious how many seasonal readers they used. And they used the term external readers. So seasonal readers, external readers, same thing, just another term to put in your admissions vernacular vocab. And for a big number, I'm also going to draw off my trip. So today's Wednesday, 8 days ago, I spent a half a day at USC. And it was an individual tour. So I had this tour from a representative from Highland Park, University Park, which if you know anything about Texas, that's the most affluent section of the state. And he was talking about, I mean, he loves USC, so I don't want to, besmirch what he's saying about the school. But you know me, I'm always going to ask what you don't like, what you would want to change, all those things. So one thing he doesn't like is how expensive everything is. And he feels like the school nickel and dimes you. And I felt that way too, by the way, because they're the only school on an official NACAC trip that made us pay for our own parking. Like, why am I paying for $20 to park when, I have 3 students at this school, could have more after this trip. I'm promoting you. Can't you cover my parking? Like, when I was at LMU, they were like, listen, here's your voucher. And if for some reason you get a ticket, let us know. We'll cover it. Anyway, you can see I grinded my gears a little bit. But anyway, so the student was talking about he doesn't like how all the expenses are always overcharging you. So then I went back to USC again on Sunday for 3 hours. 3 hours. I met with 3 students and one mom because it was parents' weekend. And so it was great. And they were from different places. Well, actually, 2 were from Chicago, 1 was from New York. But we were talking a lot. And I brought the subject up, right? Like, do you find that things are expensive and you're getting nickel and dimed? All right. So here's the big number. One of my students said, yeah, it's $18 for a smoothie. And it's not even good. $18 is the big number because I have never paid $18 for a smoothie. And if I'm going to pay $18, which I really wouldn't do anyway, yeah, I have a little bit of Dave in me. I got on Dave for, you have to be a longtime listener to know Dave. I used to always nickel and needle him for being so tight-fisted that he'd push Lincoln off the penny. But I got a little bit of that in me. I'm not paying $18 for a smoothie. I'll pass. But if I do, it better be good. So 18 is our big number. I could have given you another big number. When I was at UCLA, I asked them how many seasonal readers they had, and they told me 252, which is the highest number I've heard at any school in the country. But then again, they do have the most applications in the country every year, 147,000. There's a third big number for you. So anyway, that's my big number, my tip, and my admissions vernacular. Now I have my conversation with Julia about why some colleges do not like teacher recommendations in their college admission process.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
You know, Julia and I were going to find an article to talk about. This has never happened to me, Julia. I just couldn't find a good enough article that I felt would be as good as just randomly talking to you about a bunch of stuff that I keep getting asked in the counseling room. So I think we'll do one of our just chat issues, and we've got like 5 topics and we're running over a few episodes. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I think everyone's a little overwhelmed with the start of the school year. So no good articles right now.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is some colleges are moving away from requiring teacher recommendations. University of Texas, probably the biggest one out there, but they're not the only one. There's talk about, is it a trend? I'm going to read something and just have Julia chime in with her thoughts. And so this comes from Miguel Wazalewski. You know what? I have to tell you the story, Julia. I met Miguel at Westminster School here in Atlanta in 2018. And he was one of the first people I ever asked to be an interview on the podcast.
Oh, no way!
And I'm still waiting. But, you know, it's all good. No, he's a great guy. Let me read what he says. Miguel, the provost of admissions at UT Austin, says, we have consistently heard from our high school partners that requests for letters of recommendations have become overwhelming, especially considering writing often occurs outside of normal work hours. Our experience is that the majority of recommendations submitted are generally repetitive of details already included in the application and do not typically provide significant additional context or information that strengthens the application. He adds, letters of recommendation are optional and have the most utility when they provide unique details about the student. Considering the application mostly reflects the high school experience, letters of recommendation external to the high school have more potential to provide additional insight into the student. What say you?
Well, and I'll be curious, Mark, if you have different thoughts than me, but UT Austin, as well as the other schools I know that are no longer requiring letters of rec, like, for example, Penn State, any of their campuses, Clemson a few years ago kind of got rid of pretty much everything that is needed besides some grades. That to me, this is really, I only see this as a trend at very large, often, if not always, public institutions. And so there's 2 things going on. One is a huge volume of applications. Actually, 3 things going on. The second being that they're biggest geo-market or the largest amount of applications are coming from the public high schools of that state, right? They're meant to serve the students of their state. And then the third one being a lot of these schools increasingly really just rely on a GPA and sort of maybe major of choice or what school you're applying to within the university, perhaps some demographics, but they're not really practicing holistic admissions in the way that some private schools do. So to me, this is not necessarily indicative of all schools doing this, but I think it is very real. Friends in Texas, if you're not familiar, I used to have Texas as my territory when I was an admissions officer. I would call before I entered the building to ask the guidance counselor when was passing time between classes, because I would get picked up in a sea of 1,400 high school students at a pretty basic average sized high school in Texas.
Everything's
so these
big.
are also huge high schools where your guidance counselor and your teachers are going to have massive amounts of students and do not have the bandwidth to write not only really helpful letters of recommendation, but maybe letters of recommendation, right? So to me, this is more a trend of they're serving or they're making an access point. They're letting the pressure out their a release valve to make sure that they really are able to serve the students of their state who are their primary constituents.
Yeah, I agree with almost everything you said there. I certainly feel they're large schools when you see this. They are schools that are being overwhelmed with the workload. And part of the reason is also to make it easier. You're right. They normally have a large number of kids coming from large public schools for whom this is more of a problem to do that with those high ratios. And when a national average is over 400 to 1.
Yeah. Oof.
The interesting thing, though, this is where you have to be so careful at putting people into a box because I remember going to Georgia Tech in maybe 2019. And at the time, they said they were so adamant. They're like, we have a counselor letter and we want one teacher letter. Because they said times 2 by our applicant pool. And this is how many, this is how many recommendations we need to read. And they're a school that at one time used 5 outside readers and got all the way up to as high as 60 as far as seasonal readers. But last year, or was it this year? The years are going together. It was either last year or this year. You may remember, Julia. They made a big point of saying that they will allow up to 4 now, not requiring, but they will allow up to 4. So there's an example of a big school going slightly in the other direction. We've had John Bockenstadt on our podcast before, and he's been very, he was at DePaul, which is private, but large. And he was been very outspoken and has written many articles on why he doesn't think schools should have letters of recommendation. Basically, the bias, he uses a similar argument to what you hear about test scores.
Yep.
Which is they highly favor people that come from small private schools where they know you well and so they're advantaging the advantaged. And so I think there may be some of that factoring into a reason is one of the reasons. I don't think that's the primary reason, though. I think the primary reason has to do with the logistics and handling volume, but that's not necessarily how they're leading in terms of how they're articulating it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I would also, it's no one's fault necessarily, but I also do a bit agree with the sentiment that the teacher recs, even when provided, are perhaps not as helpful and do repeat. I would say, even when I read apps this year, all the way from when I read them 12 plus years ago. And I have a number of friends who are public school teachers, for example, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm writing, 20 recs. And what I do is I have the student come in and meet with me and and they go over their brag sheet with me about here's what I do after school. And here's what that is absolutely information. A lot of the times teacher recs are really well-meaning, but between bandwidth and that fact that, again, some of this information is so privileged, either because it doesn't reach the right people or people don't have time to take this in. But More often than not, the teacher recs are telling me something I've already learned from the student from their application. And so if you are a teacher listening that writes recs, and Mark, feel free to correct me if you feel differently, but your primary role is to explain what that student is like in your classroom and attend to the academic life of that student. I do think sometimes I have teachers that maybe coach the student as well, or also served as an advisor in some way. That's fine too. But I often find most of the recs I read, I actually end up crossing out more than half of the teacher rec for the next reader, so they don't need to bother reading something that doesn't help the college learn about the student as a student, and is just repetitive information that's not at all helpful.
And I'm smiling over here because, when you work with people, they rub off on you, right? So I've learned from Julia now, I've picked up your saying that doesn't land well. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
I've borrowed that from you. And I've been obviously, doing quite a few recordings with Andy Strickler. So I've picked up something he says a lot. It's now in my vocab. He does 100%, 100%, 100%. So that's my thought when you were saying all that. 100%, 100%. Yeah. In fact, I've been able to attend teacher rec writing training from some of the most selective schools in this country. And this is, I would say, the number one thing that they emphasize.
Yes.
The number one thing when I go through their teacher rec training. And they do this, especially when I was director of admission to CBO. They would bring us in and do all of this, training. And I've heard of same message, all of them. They all say the same thing. Focus, and Susan and I have had many conversations about how useless so many recs are, such a wasted opportunity.
Yeah.
But we see this all the time. I mean, how many times, you may not get it, Julia, because you've been in circles where people are trained differently, but
exactly.
I constantly have my students coming to me and asking me to help them with their brag sheet. They're told they need a brag sheet, and it's oftentimes, most of the time, it's a lot of extracurriculars, kind of resume type stuff in there. Now, I will say this, some of the high-powered public schools that are really college prep are better.
Totally.
And I noticed they seem a lot more like the independent schools because they'll have a form, and some of it's actually quite good. I said to our team, I said, ooh, well, this wasn't a public school. This was, Trinity in New York. But I said, ooh, I'm really liking a couple of these questions here. We might have to borrow these and incorporate them. But I've seen it for some good public schools too. Like, I'm going to shout out a school, Summit High School in New Jersey. It's a school I've worked with a lot. Like, they have a very good form. Somebody has gotten to them and told them and done some education. And one of the reasons why these schools go around and do this rec writer training is because it's almost like they're pleading and saying like, we don't want to have the uneven gap on the playing field, but your kids are at a disadvantage. If you're coming in and they talk about a lot of other things as well, telling, not showing, right? How huge that is. Let me see the student, what they look like with anecdotes. One of the big things Stanford emphasized was stop spending a paragraph on you. What I mean? I've been here for 25 years. I've sent, blah, 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 know, and I know people mean well. I'm sure you've read a lot of that, Julie. You've seen that a lot, right?
Always.
But they do these training sessions because they really are like, I don't want this gap between the haves and the have-nots. And, even that, Julie and I think a whole entire team, are not happy with the emphasis and return to required standardized testing that's seen happening across the country. We feel there's enough information in the file to make those decisions without kids having to go through that. And once people see a number, a lot of times they won't see character. But I am sympathetic to something that, Lee Coffin and Yale and some of those schools have said, that when they get students from some under-resourced schools and they don't have a track record with them, they don't have the extracurriculars, because those things are highly correlated with resources. The school may or may not have AP or advanced classes or have a full array of all of them. Now you take testing out, they tend to get shoddy recommendations. Right. Like, you're not really giving me that much for a school I don't have a lot of, familiarity with and a super competitive. I am very sensitive to that, and I do think that is absolutely a reality, and that's not an excuse when people say that. Like, that's just a fact.
Yeah, and I will say, and this is what QuestBridge, which we've talked about a couple times on this is what they actually try to do, is that their teacher rec form asks very specific questions and have short answers for the teachers to get at the exact kind of information that they know that the admission officers are looking for. So if you're maybe a teacher doing that, even just filling out the school report form on the Common App is sometimes pretty helpful for when you maybe have a student who doesn't normally apply to this college, or maybe you work with students that don't normally apply to four-year colleges. Even just knowing like, hey, this is a top student I've had in my career. This is not just like, oh, this is great top 10% kid, top of the class each year that I've had. So even just being able to provide some kind of context can even be helpful, as long as it's, even with the check boxes, it's just more specific and helpful for the reader to understand something about the student.
So, Julia, do you see this as a trend that will take off? I mean, I do think at the most selectives, they're not walking away from their teacher recs. Like, they love those teacher recs. They really do. Like, I mean, Emory, it's one of their 4 cores in their rubric. Like, they have a 4-tier rubric, right? It's like academic excellence, intellectual curiosity, extracurricular impact, and recommendations. It's one of their 4.
Yeah, I've actually, both colleges I've read for, I no longer at Haverford, but way back when at Haverford, I did have an internal rating that informed my overall rating for the student that was just based solely on teacher recommendations.
Yeah.
So I don't, but what I am seeing as a trend, I could easily see this catching on with very similar schools.
Flagships.
Now, yes, large. It'd be interesting. I'm always waiting for Michigan to change something up and give themselves a break, because they have too many essays for how many applicants they get. I like their essays, don't get me wrong, but I just can't imagine having to read all of those and then make decisions. But I could definitely see it among maybe moderately selective to not super selective. And by that, I still mean selective, right?
Well, but keep in mind, Texas is really selective. I mean, I'll have kids in Texas who are in the top 1% of their class that they're surprised if they get in Macomb's Business School.
My Milton students are often upset when I have to inform them, like, this is an unlikely option. And perhaps if you had been in state and were able to make that top 6%, we'd have a different story, but they're meant to serve their in-state students. And then also Villanova actually has long only allowed for the submission of 1 teacher rec. And they've become so much more selective over the last 15 years. And they've held that policy true. You can't even try to submit another letter if you want to. And they have said the counselor letter, which gives the academic and the community snapshot of the student, along with 1 teacher rec, is all we need to determine. And they're also admitting by major. They're admitting within the schools too. So they just determined, hey, we just need 1 person to kind of say more about that. So I could see it in the, it getting more traction with large institutions, perhaps public institutions, perhaps institutions that might practice holistic admissions, but their general driver, sort of like the University of California system, would be a GPA, right? Along with rigor in the transcript. So I can't at all foresee, like you said, Mark, uber selective places. Especially, I wouldn't be able to, when you're looking at very few seats for so many wonderful students, you're going to need something to know that they're going to be not just great in the classroom, but unique or impactful in the classroom. And that, I primarily get that information when I'm reading an application solely from the letters of recommendation.
You know what else is interesting? There's almost no schools that make outside or external recommendations required. Like Davidson and Dartmouth come the closest, kind of with they strongly encourage the peer rec, right? Yep. But it's almost always optional. Always optional. So to go from pretty much across the board, that being optional, to it being viewed as equal, I just don't see that happening in the next decade for the highly selective private schools.
No, I don't. And I wondered too with UT's statement on that, if that was more just a like, hey, we probably don't find any recommendations helpful, but we want to give you a chance to sort of like, when schools move from not offering interviews to letting you submit a 90-second video, which we all know has no impact on your candidacy. I think, for example, I actually, one of the high schools I worked with, we vetted every single outside rec, because I would say, while almost all were well-intentioned, people were not writing in the spirit of a letter of recommendation for a college app. And so I'd get either not helpful information about the student, or it would be written so poorly, which shouldn't be held against the student, but it was written so poorly that the admission officer got nothing out of it. And so I think you take a big risk. I've even worked with transfer students whose own professors at their colleges are like, I don't know if I want to write. Like, this is not. So a lot of times finding people that have the bandwidth, the time, and the know-how to write a helpful letter of recommendation that's not an academic one or a teacher, I think it's a really low chance. And again, is a function of privilege. My students who often had, again, independent school students take up a lot of space in the admissions process, and so many of them feel the need to have a supplemental letter of recommendation, which is often like, oh, hey, my dad hooked me up with his friend who's a professor at this institute and I worked with them, or, like I do love myself, like a religious leader rec but sometimes that person doesn't know you that well, and or they're not the appropriate person to ask either, right?
And there's always the big wig, highly connected people that people try to use, and know dad knows somebody on the board, knows somebody on the board, and you get a lot of those. Like, people have connections. They really do. People of privilege have connections. Tremendous connections. Like,
yes.
Like, if a school is not if they don't have some commitment to first gen, under resourced at some level, like the whole system would just overpower them. It's very easy for me to see why 38, when Ross Chetty did a study, that 38 schools had more kids from the top 1% than the bottom 60. Like, that is so easy. Like, that number would even be higher probably if there weren't some safeguards in place, and schools like making commitments to Questbridge and programs like that. Like, the way the system is set up, it's just so biases advantage and privilege, and that comes through with the Rex. But anyway, hopefully we whet people's appetite. We certainly didn't solve cancer here or anything, no. But try to let you know a buzz of some of the things going on out there. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you.
Friends, if you like these topics that Julia and I are discussing about common questions we're getting in our college admission process, our counseling practice, well, we're going to be back for the next 3 weeks to discuss 3 other questions we're getting asked a lot.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, I'm thrilled. I'm here with 3 amigos, not 4. Julia had a conflict, but I'm here with Vince, Susan, and Hillary. Welcome back for our roundtable.
Woo!
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Mark.
Hi. So we're doing a little different this time. We've done it on activities section of the Common App. We've done it on honors section. This time we're doing QFLs and just getting multiple perspective on QFLs. So we'll play the first question from a listener, from Kathy from Philadelphia.
Hi, my name is Kathy, and I'm in the Philadelphia suburbs, and I was hoping you would address the sudden University Arts closure. I have a rising senior hoping to go into the performing creative arts, and this really is scary. A lot of these programs in performing arts are either super duper high powered and hard to get into, or they're small in smaller colleges and with smaller endowments and smaller groupings of kids. So what do we also now need to be aware of, in addition to everything else with auditions and pre-recs and pre-screens and all the other plethora of things that a performing artist as a kid going to college needs to find out about? What should we be looking for so this doesn't happen to my child or anybody else's child in this situation? Thanks.
So who wants to start off our discussion?
Well, Kathy, since I'm your neighbor out here in Westchester, Pennsylvania, I'm not sure where you are in the burbs, but we certainly were very involved with the UArts closure here in suburban Philadelphia, and felt the pain of all the kids who were enrolled there, the people on the faculty, and of course, all of you who are prospective families for such a fine institution. And, when I was at my school for many years, we had many students go to UArts, either as part-time students or degree candidates. But the first thing that came to my mind when I heard your question, and I think Mark's going to talk a little bit more about the financial weeds of, what reports to read. But if I were looking for a BFA program in fine arts, I would look for an institution that is directly connected to either a university or a museum. Because as standalone institutions, art schools tend to not have the strongest endowments. I think UArts endowment closed at about $61 million, if I'm not mistaken. And I haven't heard yet how that's being distributed or the physical property of the college. But, we've got, Temple University here that has the Boyer School of Arts, Tufts University in Boston, actually, only in the last few years went into a partnership with the museum school in Boston.
Yep.
Right. That was a fairly recent, not a merger, but a partnership. Yeah. The School of the Museum of Fine Arts, which was part of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, but did not have another academic affiliation. So I think there are a lot of art schools out there looking for financial backbones and partnerships with museums and universities. That's kind of the layperson's or the college counselor's version. But Mark, you certainly know a lot about the financial reports.
Yeah, we've talked about this on a few other episodes, so I'll be succinct. But there's the layman's way of doing it, and this is Lisa says she likes to use this approach, and you can use some of the aggregators out there. So Forbes and Hechinger, they're two of the ones that do financial fitness tracking and rank schools and give grades to schools. If you want to know the exact names of the Hechinger and the Forbes sources, Hechinger's is called Hechinger Financial Fitness Tracker, and for Forbes, it's called Forbes College Financial Grades, and you could just Google them. And so those are two sources to check if you want the quick, fast overview. Now, if you like to do a little bit more of your own research, then there's a couple of things that I'd recommend. There's two things that you really want to track. You want to track, is enrollment increasing and decreasing? And is net tuition revenue increasing or decreasing? And you can track both of them, through common data set. And so, you'd be looking at the enrollment information, which is section B of common data set, and the financial information, which is section H of common data set. And you're going to want to track it for, at least 3 years, 3 to 5 years to see trend lines. Now, to put too much of a plug, but I think it's worth it, Jeffrey Salingo's got a book coming out that focuses on doing this exact thing so that somebody doesn't have to go through common data set and look things up themselves. And so focusing mostly on that net tuition revenue. So when I interviewed the president, Roger Parrott, he basically, I think persuasively shot down putting too much emphasis on enrollment, because he's like, anybody can come if you give away the farm and you make it free, right? So the bigger factor really is the overall amount of net tuition revenue that's coming in. So that's a really important indicator. Like, if you're declining in your enrollment and you're declining your revenue, you're in trouble. And another thing that you can do is you can look up the 990s if you really want to get technical, and you can use like a website like guidestar.org that has every 990, which is financial information for the schools. And that's another source. So it's a little bit of legwork, but it's important information. And let's face it, colleges are under attack right now. I mean, even some pretty healthy ones. And we're about to hit the peak of the enrollment cliff. Or we're going into it, right? So those of you not know what we're referring to here, and this is something that happens pretty consistently. When the country goes through a tough time, like the global financial crisis, 07 to 09, people have less kids because they're having a tough time making ends meet. So you can just add 18 years from 2007 and you get 2025. And so the graphs and charts that are out there, like the number of 18-year-olds is down, and it's going to be down significantly for a few years. So, and then, we've talked about this before, but all the other things that are competing for college, whether it's jobs right out of college or online or, different, badges and certificates and just decreased belief that a college degree is worth it. All these things are coming together, and it's really challenging for a lot of schools that even fairly selective schools are having some challenges. So art schools and women's colleges have traditionally been more difficult. And that's not to just paint a broad stroke of the brush, because Spelman's never been healthier. I think Smith has never been healthier. Yep. Wellesley, Barnard, like there are some women's colleges and there are some art schools that are thriving, but just know that a sizable number of the amount of the population is not going to go to a women's college. Like 92% of people say, I won't consider a women's college. And same for art schools, like just lots and lots of parents that say, I'm not going to pay for that. So you do need to watch those schools. That's why more and more and more of them are merging as well. So Vince, Hillary, anything you want to add?
I think you covered it. I think that was pretty.
I have one thought.
Yeah, go ahead, Hillary.
I don't know if you'll agree with this, Mark, but it's really easy, at least for me at Colorado College, it's really easy to go onto our website and find the minutes from the Board of Trustees meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be an interesting, if you're concerned about the health of the schools that you're looking at, I think it would be an interesting exercise to read some of the minutes from the boards of trustees from those schools. Because like when I go and look at CCs, I can see that they're talking about building a new science building, and they're,
sure,
working like the work that they're doing with architects and these sort of markers of growth, right? I would imagine that if I were looking at a school that were in more of a stressful situation, right, financially, that the conversations would look very different. And so it might be worth just looking at those minutes to see kind of what's going on in those meetings.
That's a great idea, Hillary.
Yeah,
I'd never thought of that before.
Very interesting. I'm surprised that they would be available to the public.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're not for everyone, but ours are.
Newspapers are good too, because when they're pressing issues, they will have communication there, because newspapers assume that they're talking to people already in the institution. They don't assume they're talking to prospects. So there's a high level of transparency there. And
if you look at student newspapers, Mark,
yes,
kids will complain loudly in the paper about what the cutbacks are.
Yeah.
Are faculty being reduced in certain departments? Are majors being eliminated? Is there deferred maintenance?
Yep.
Kids tend to be loud about that stuff in their own journalism. Mark, what about looking at the percentage of full pay students at an institution? I heard somebody say that once.
Yeah, I think the overall net tuition revenue is more important, because you can get at the amount of money either by having more people pay full, or the combination of enrollment increase with the money, right? Like that's the bottom line of your bottom line dollars. And that also shows up if you go to the 990 too. So maybe you get at it by adding 100 kids, and then maybe people pay a little less, or there's maybe not as many full pay. Across the country, you're seeing less schools have more full pay families. Because more and more people, there's more and more schools that say that we're going to give you merit money, and they don't need to do it. One of the things I want to have Andy Strickler come on and talk about, he guided Connecticut College through going from being a no merit money school to giving merit money. And he feels really good about it. Not only did it help the school financially, but there were so many more families earning 100 to 200,000. Now maybe 100, 200,000, where before they had such a barbell. But so I think you're going to see in general a lot of schools that will have less full pays than they had before. So I'd be a little concerned about that. I think you'd see almost 80% of schools, and that I don't know that number scientifically, but I know I've had conversations with many schools, and they consistently say that, like, much lower percentage of people pay full now than used to. I find colleges don't just look at full pay students, but full pay and high pay. If you, as a student, are paying significantly more than the average net tuition revenue, even if you're not a full-pay student, you're in a highly desirable category at the majority of colleges and universities, as long as you can, of course, do the work and your character is acceptable. But the more you sort of go up the selectivity meter, selectivity tier, which is usually but not always similar to the financially solid schools list, the less of a factor being full pay or high pay is in the admission process. For example, if a college has a net tuition revenue goal of $20,000 per student, and let's just say tuition's $40,000, but you are paying $30,000 to $35,000 because they gave your student a small merit scholarship, you are going to be a highly desirable target at a lot of colleges, hundreds and hundreds of colleges, maybe even thousands of colleges. And you're only going to become more highly desirable in the upcoming years. There's a whole world out there of financial aid leveraging that specifically targets families that can pay more than the average net tuition revenue and does research on how much of a merit scholarship you have to give in order to entice them. Not because the student did anything that was noteworthy, but more because the school needs the net tuition revenue that they're going to generate. Of course, they would never yield the student if they were to be totally transparent and said, hey, we're admitting you because you can pay more money than our average student pays. So you're going to help our net tuition revenue. But they'll put a nice package in a bow and heap a lot of praise on the student, give you a merit scholarship. And the student gets to feel proud. The parent gets to feel proud of little Johnny. And the parent, of course, is happy to save the 10 or 15K they received in merit money. So it feels like a win for the student, a win for the parent, and a win for the institution. Now, when I had Stephen Bird, author of Lifting the Veil on Enrollment Management, How a Powerful Industry is Limiting Social Mobility on the podcast, he challenged this practice. And he made the case that there's only one pot of money. So by giving money to families who don't need it, you're taking money away from people who truly can't afford college, and therefore you're limiting your social mobility and your socioeconomic diversity. But when colleges are either in survival mode, just keeping their doors open, or survival as a quality institution, not wanting to have to slash too many jobs from staff, administration, and faculty and slash too many departments, and they have bills to pay, or else they're going to have to either close, merge, or become a shell of what they once were, then they're going to do what they need to do. You know, one thing I want to go back to that you said, though, Susan, I loved all the things that you mentioned that are available in school newspapers, and I'm always talking about school newspapers. But one thing I don't think I talk about a lot is in particularly the op-ed sections.
Yes, absolutely.
That's really a place where people are going to voice those opinions a lot. And I mean, I'm a fan of reading all of it, but that's a great place to go, is go to the op-ed sections of the newspapers. And pretty much all school newspapers are online, although literally just before we came on today, you know, we do this thing in our own newspaper, our own newsletter, Your College Bound Kid newsletter. We just started it 4 months ago. We put links to sort of hot articles that we think people would want to read. And I was submitting the links for this month. And I almost put one up. It was, I can't remember the school, or I named them. As part of their budget cuts, they've slashed the school newspaper. So,
no.
Yeah. So, you know, so I'm always saying every school's got a school newspaper, but now I have to have a caveat. Almost every school does. It might not survive the budget cuts. But I sure had a lot of articles to choose from when it came to budget cuts. Like there was school after school laying off this, laying off that. And so I don't want to be all doom and gloom here and discourage people. But
well, and, you know, cutbacks and layoffs don't necessarily mean financial instability. It may mean changes in the demand in different academic programs. And in the past, a lot of those cutbacks were just letting retirements happen on the faculty and not replacing those people. You know, you're
Susan,
not going to.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
When I interviewed the president of West Florida, Martha Saunders, she made a really big emphasis on this. She used the term sunsetting. You know, she said, I hate it when we have to sunset a program, but if but she said, if the demand isn't there, And it was also in the context, the demand may not be there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a school's, overall revenue is declining. Although oftentimes it does, because there are things that people just fundamentally believe are an important component of good education. And when you start slashing all these programs in the arts and humanities and social sciences, it's normally not what a provost or somebody wants to do, but it's still, there's so much nuance in there. Awesome.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Hopefully this was helpful, Kathy.
Good question.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we're up to part 4 of our 5-part interview with David Graves, Director of Admission at UGA and 27-year veteran of that office. In part 4, David talks about the difference between their in-state yield and their out-of-state yield for their admitted applicants. We turn our attention to some of the strongest programs at UGA, and David tells us more about the Grady School of Journalism. Then he tells us more about the Terry School of Business, tells us more about the Double Dogs program. He tells us more about the UGA Honors College and the Center for Undergraduate Research. David talks about animal science. He talks about food and nutrition. And David talks about the sports management major. Listen and enjoy. Now, you mentioned your transfer yield is around 75%. What would be your in-state yield and out-of-state for undergraduate?
For freshmen, the in-state yield this year was, I think, about 56, 57%. We know that even Georgians, they're going to have some great options.
Sure.
I have 2 kids. Again, I mentioned my daughter went to Georgia. My son is at Georgia Tech grad.
Yeah, that rivalry's going to happen there, right?
Yep. I love my daughter a little bit more.
But you forced them to change their admission dates and move their admission dates up because they were losing too many to you. Rick even admits that.
Oh, man. So, well, it's a fun rivalry in some ways, but we go around the state together and talk to students. But we know that 2 different institutions are going to be some competition. Sure. But it's most of the time in-state student, if we don't enroll a student that we've admitted, probably they're going to Tech, and Tech probably feels the same way with us for certain majors as well. Out of state, probably about low 20-something range percent will yield. And again, if you're admitted here, one, you're going to be a strong student, so you've got a lot of great options. If I'm advising a student, who's from North Carolina, and it's like, well, financially, it's going to be, challenging. I said, Chapel Hill, if you're admitted there and you are dealing with such a low tuition rate, and if that's the key, go with that route because it makes financial sense. I'm a parent of 2 college graduates. It's not easy to fund it always, and so make a good choice that's a good fit, a good academic tie, a good campus feeling, but also a good financial option. Don't make a bad decision just because that's the place. It's got to be a financial fit as well.
David, does a student's high school rank impact admissions decisions in the way you review an applicant?
At UGA, we don't really look at class rank within a decision process. I mean, we've worked within the state to say, yes, we'll admit, if a student meets, our key areas, and if you're a valedictorian or salutatorian, we will admit you. And that's a guarantee for in-state at most of the high schools within the state. But overall, we're not looking at class rank. We are looking at grades and rigor, which of course impacts class rank, but it just gets too messy because some high schools don't give us class rank, and others it's just very murky. So it's not a process that we are focused on. Let's talk about some of your stronger programs.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the Grady School of Journalism?
I love the Grady School. Grady School of Journalism. One, it starts with the dean. I don't know a lot of deans personally, but Dean Davis down there, he's just, the students, love him. And you don't hear that a lot. It's not like, oh yeah, I know the dean. He goes out, he is well known within his students. The faculty at Grady School are great as far as that, and they've had to adapt more than any other college. you're seeing that journalism schools have had to adapt. As you suddenly change, imagine suddenly it's okay, you have suddenly changed the entire world of what your major is, from print journalism, newspaper, magazines, to suddenly saying, how else do we do things? Podcasts. I mean, right now, what we're doing, they've had to change, and they have changed. Got some wonderful friends down there who work within sports journalism. It's a natural fit, but we have students who are just over at the Olympics working, and they really get their students involved. That's key as well, is not just, hey, what are you teaching them, but how do you get them real world experience and get them, whether it's in front of the cameras, whether it's writing, whether it's a podcast, whatever it is, they've got some great tools that they've used and some connections throughout not only Georgia, but throughout the United States to say, we're going to make your experience great.
Let's talk about Terry School of Business. What do you want to tell us about that? Another very strong
Terry
program,
College.
right?
I mean, one great thing, of course, if you're talking about financial investment for a student, of course, a business school is always going to be the ones who bring in that donor money and are able to support their students. Terry College of Business, they built their own campus within a campus in some ways. If you go walk down, 10 years ago, it was, here's two large buildings. Suddenly they built a 5-building new campus right next to the freshman residence halls and the dining area. They have made it so that they really are very strong as far as making sure their students both are successful in the classroom, but also successful afterwards. More than any other college on campus, I would say, I can't say that exactly, but as much as any other college on campus, they've really pushed, let's get you out in the business world. Let's get you out in the business world early. Let's get you thinking about it freshman year. Let's get you connected so that you're ready for your next stage in life. It's not think about that later. Let's talk about, just, classes. No, they are preparing their students. And it's not, again, many people think, oh, well, Georgians are going to stay in Georgia. No, we're talking throughout not only the U.S., but internationally. You've got a really strong connection as far as international studies and international experience as far as College of Business and also a few others. But they have really done a good job of making those connections, of raising the funds to be able to make the program a really powerhouse school.
Let's talk about Double Dogs. Tell us what Double
Okay.
Dogs is, and what do you want our families to know about Double Dogs?
Double Dogs. All right. So Double Dogs, one, again, the best example I usually give is my daughter. My daughter is a double dog. And what it meant was that when she was probably a sophomore at UGA, she was able to say, my program that she wanted to say, she wanted to work within a nonprofit, she believed, and she knew that a master's degree was going to be key for that. And, some majors that doesn't fit. If you're going into medical school, you're not saying, oh, well, let me get a master's first. But where you're seeing that, hey, I really know that a master's degree can help me successfully move forward in my job, that's what a double dog is as far as the key focus for them. And what it is that if you come in, you can say, here's a master's program that's connected with my undergraduate where I can take for the last year as an undergraduate, for senior year, I can take courses that will apply both to my undergraduate degree and a graduate degree here. So we can get you generally out of UGA in 5 years with both a bachelor's and a master's. And for in-state students, out of state, we still want you to take part of it, but in-state students, that means that half of your master's degree is paid for by Hope or Zell, by the state. And it's a great option because you really get to accelerate in your passion, and financially, it's a great option, and time-wise. If I'm able to say, wow, you can come out with a master's degree in 5 years, that's a pretty good thing. And they have 100 plus programs that they've said, let's match you to as far as what your interests are. Is it every master's degree? No. There's not always going to be that connection. Again, it needs to be where you talk with your advisor, talk with the Double Dogs program. but it can get you out the door with a much higher level as far as both preparation for a job and compensation. I mean, that's the reality. If you're coming out with an education degree and you also got your master's in education, suddenly you're talking about $10,000 plus that you could put in your pocket every year and not have to worry about taking that master's degree while you're also teaching. So that's the other thing, is it's one where it just flows naturally. For my daughter, it was also one more year to have a national championship, so she loved that if nothing else. But yeah, because it is one thing where our students, they love UGA, they love Athens, and at times they don't want to leave. We still say, yeah, you got to go. We have a few students who do 4.5 years just to get another football season in, but we try and say, you know what, parents, tell them 4 years, that's good enough, maybe 4.5, but we want you here, but we also want you to get out in the world.
Let's talk about your honors college, which is oftentimes in the conversation for the better honors colleges in the country. Yeah. What makes the honors college special?
The honors college has been around a long time. I remember when President Moorhead, who's president of the university, he has had many roles. He at one point was head of the honors program. So he's worked his way through, and he's respected enough that now they've named it the Moorhead Honors College as far as for him. And it has a legacy as far as for about, I would say, 10% of our freshman class coming in, we're saying we're going to connect you with specific faculty. We're going to make sure that you have research. We're going to make sure that you're prepared for the next step in your path. Many times that would be master's, PhD programs, or students that are looking at that. And we also have ties as far as those upper level scholarship programs, Goldwater Scholars, Gates, Fulbright. We had another, Mariah Cady was 2023 Rhodes Scholars. And so you have a history of taking these students and saying, you are amazing right now. You're in the top 10% of a rigorous institution. Let's push you to really go out there. They push you as far as with research grants to be able to do that work. They push you as far as study abroad options to really make those connections and get you ready for that next high level step. I think the University of Georgia is great as a whole. These are that next level student. Some of the students are going to say, hey, I get a specific advisor that I connect with. I get to register early. There's where for freshmen, they generally are going to live in the same residence hall and make those connections. So it's also hey, let me connect with those students that I really bond with. I see it sometimes in high schools where it's, hey, here's AP Physics. You're not going to have just anybody jump in and say, let me take AP Physics. It's not a pleasure class always. It's a rigorous class. But those students in AP Physics will bond together and say, hey, let's work with each other, let's help each other, and they form that connection. Same way honors students here make that connection and connect with other honors students to help as a group and a team to really progress. But it's for those students who are saying, I want to shoot even higher than what many people think of. I would not have been that type of student who said, yeah, let me really start thinking about PhD programs and the medical profession, etc. These are students who are really accelerated.
And what about Center for Undergraduate Research? What do you want to say about that? I know that's another thing UGA is known for.
Yep, and that's tied in with the honors program. It's made that connection. So but it's not always for students who are in the honors program. But again, it's saying if you are in a field, not always in a field, but if you just have a passion for something and really want to do research, go for it. Many times people think, oh, that means science. That means those STEM areas where it's research, genetics, etc., where we can connect you with a leading geneticist. But it's also, again, our most recent Rhodes Scholar, she was in Curo. She studied about refugees in Europe, was able to do political aspects of it. It's, again, connecting you with that idea of research. And you've seen a little bit more of that because of the AP research classes they now have and getting them involved in a little bit more detailed one. But you're seeing political science majors, you're seeing business sometimes, computer science. I mean, you're seeing students who just really want to progress. This is a financial assistance situation where we're saying, well, let's help you get where you want to be. It's competitive. Honors college is competitive. Curo is competitive to get. Sometimes honors college, it's going to be, hey, I didn't get in as a freshman, but after my first semester, freshman year, I apply the honors college and I can get in. It is that, again, that top range of the students within the freshman class.
David, what can you tell me about your excellent animal science department?
As far as certain majors, animal science is an extremely strong major. One, because we, of course, have the vet school for the state of Georgia. And so you're able to focus on large animals as far as the farm animals. You can do small animals as far as pets. And it gets a connection within the vet school, within that undergraduate program of animal science that is really a good sort of stepping stone right into that field. So it is a great option for a number of students who are looking at going into the vet program.
David, what can you tell us about your Department of Food and Nutrition?
For nutritional science, you're looking at many times an individual who is wanting to study nutrition and then go into the health field. And so it's a good focus on the key idea of nutrition and a well-balanced, diet as far as supporting that positive health focus. And then many students, again, go into, either research or go into the health field, sometimes as far as an MD or allied health as a whole, but it really gets them prepared as far as studying that nutritional aspect of it.
David, sports management has become very popular in recent years with students. What can you share about UGA's sports management degree?
Being in Georgia and being at UGA, of course, you have a lot of sports that are very powerful. And, we saw it as far as just this past weekend with UGA's football team doing so well. And sort of it ties in with the sports management degree in that you really get to learn a great deal more about how to promote, how to focus on the sports industry, and making the key for this is making those connections with internships. So we both with, some college sports, but also looking at the professional levels. Atlanta, of course, has a great deal of opportunities for internships. We have students who have done internships with the Olympics. I saw a number of them during this summer's Olympics, but also with the associated agencies that are tied into sports management, that really helps. And as far as pairing up sometimes with communications and with journalism to work with ESPN or other ties in like that.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with David Graves. I hope you'll join us next week for the next section. Friends, on Monday's episode, I will be recounting insights from the NACAC conference. And I'm also going to take a question that a listener asked me and reply to it in that episode. And of course, we're going to continue our interview with Aaron Wolf, part 3 of 5, looking at 17 reasons why, if a student gets in 6 schools, I could say 8 schools, 10 schools, whatever it is, the offers are absolutely all over the place. I shared once before that I saw a $60,000 difference this year from 2 schools who said they don't give any merit money at all. And there was a $60,000 difference. In one case, the student was told you don't qualify for anything. And in another case, they got $60,000 of grant money. So how does that happen? And so that's what we're talking about. We're through reasons 1 through 7, but we're going to continue on the next 10 reasons over the next 3 episodes. And we hope that you'll join us on Monday for that. And friends, remember, hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.